Hello, and welcome back to Diecast Graveyard. My name is Paul. Today we're going to do a how-to video on how to apply decals. This has been a subject that a lot of people have asked questions about, so we're going to go ahead and do that today. Few things you need. You'll need a good sharp razor blade or an X-Acto knife. You'll need some Q-tips. Here's my decal sheet that I got from Second Chance Red Lines, and we'll go into Second Chance Red Lines here in a bit. But we'll also need the micro set, which will definitely help applying your decals. Now, the first thing you need to do when you get your decals is to trim them as close as possible to where you're going to be applying the decals. And as you'll see as I trim out the decals here, I'm going as close as I possibly can to the outline of the decal. Now, one of the other things you'll need to do is trim the decal so it fits around the wheel well. And again, get as close as possible. If you don't have to have any overlap or anything hanging over an area that you don't need the decal, then go ahead and cut it out. But if it means sacrificing stability when you're putting on the decal, like if you got a very thin portion, you can always try and trim it up later on. So again, as you see here, I'm trying to trim up the decal as close as I possibly can to the outline of the decal itself. Let's go ahead and speed up the cutting here. Let's pop this out first so you can take a look at it. Make sure you have a nice sharp X-Acto blade also. Now, when it comes to X-Acto blades, you also want to ensure that you use a good quality blade. Now, I bought some cheapy ones and they didn't work that well, so I went back to paying a little bit more to get the good X-Acto ones. Again, trim these up as close as you possibly can. That looks pretty darn good right there. And that's going to fit right in place over the car, as you see. Let's go ahead and trim out the rest of the decals. Okay, we've got the decals all trimmed out. Now I have this little plastic dish, and in the dish I have a sponge. Now the reason I have that sponge in there is so the decals that I put in the water won't float away and fall off the decal paper before I get a chance to apply it. Now this is a really good tip here to put your decals on this sponge. They'll stay moist and they won't float away on you in the water. Especially if you have super tiny decals like little sponsorship decals or license plates and stuff like that. Okay, here we have the body of the car. It's all painted up. This is a 67 Chevelle. It's one of my favorite cars. We're going to use some of this micro set and we're going to wipe down the side of the car. Now the micro set helps the decal adhere to the body, and it also softens it up slightly so it'll fit into the areas around your door jambs, your door handles, etc., etc. Now later on, you may want to come back in with the micro saw, and it'll help soften up the decal really good to fit around those complex curves. Slide the decal slightly off the application paper, and then pull the paper out from underneath it. Again, you've got that micro set on there, and then move it into place with your fingers or a toothpick or a Q-tip or something like that. Just be careful with the Q-tip because they do have little hairs on there from the cotton, and it may get underneath your decal and ruin your paint job. Once you get it in place, take a Q-tip and work out any excess fluid that might be underneath the decal. Here I've got the Q-tip that I have the micro set on, but I'm also going to take the dry end of the Q-tip again and squeegee out that excess moisture. Now, the more you work the decal, the more chances you have of screwing it up. So once you get it into place, leave it. Because if you keep messing with it, you're going to screw it up and you're going to have to either get more decals, whatever. Now, normally when I have decals or make decals or buy some from Second Chance Redlines, I usually order a couple of sets of decals in case I screw up. And it does happen occasionally. Now let's go for the picture on the roof. I've applied the micro set, and here I have my Diecast Graveyard decal with some flames placed underneath it. Again, move your paper, slide the decal off, position it with your finger where you want it, and then squeegee out the excess fluid. Now I use the micro set to help squeegee it out first, so I don't hurt the decal by crumbling it, etc. Now when you get these decals from Second Chance Redlines, they've already got a protective coating on them from the printing process, so they're good to go. Again, squeegee out all the wrinkles, and you still may get some. Just take your time. It's going to take practice. You may have to pull the decal up if you have some really bad wrinkles in there. We'll get the microsol and we'll smooth that out later on. There we go, that helped. So you keep messing with it, you're going to screw it up. I do get that smoothed out eventually. Let's go ahead and move on to the next area where we're going to apply decals. Here we're going to put the flames on the hood. Now notice how the hood is raised there in the middle. This is where microsol, excuse me, is going to help out later on. Place your decal where you need it to, and then squeegee it out with your Q-tip. Position it where you need to make sure that it's centered. And again, take your Q-tip and work out the fluid and the wrinkles. That's looking pretty darn good. Now again, the difference between microsol and microset. Microset helps you apply the decals. Microsol comes in later and softens up the decals and softens it up to where you can work it around door jambs and door handles and raised hoods like you see here, etc. Now we're going to apply the decal to the trunk. This is a pretty flat surface, so you shouldn't have any problems here. Again, work the decal off the paper, slide the paper out from underneath, position the decal where you need it or want it, and then use your Q-tip to squeegee out the excess moisture. Now, it's still wet under there, so that means that it's floating on top of the fluid. You may have to hold one corner of it down with your thumb or your finger, and then work out one side and then go back to the other side afterwards. Let's rub down the other side with the microset. There we go. I gave Vince from Second Chance Redlines the information that I wanted on the car, and he came out with an excellent layout for me. Now these decals were printed with a laser printer. There's a big difference when you're using a laser printer and you're using an inkjet printer. And we'll get into that in just a bit. Now all these decals here have a white toner base, which means if you place it on a dark surface vehicle, it's going to show up really well. If you have just colors printed on clear paper or clear decal transfer paper, then it's going to have the color show through the decal colors, and it's going to muddy them up, and it's not going to look very well. Now it's going to take you a bit to practice putting decals on, but you will get good at it the more you do it. This looks really good. Now I'm going to let this set a minimum of 12 hours. I prefer to let them set overnight, and it tends to let all the moisture out, because with decals on cars, you're going to have to go back in and clear coat over them to protect the decals. If you don't, eventually they will peel up and they won't look good, and if they get scratched or whatever, that clear coat is definitely going to help them out. Now again, I used microset, and then later on you can come back in with the microsol and flatten out the decals in any areas that are raised. Now Vince from Second Chance Redlines also has his decal setting solution, and this works out very, very well. So if you want to get some decal setting solution, get microsol or microset, or get the decal setting solution from Second Chance Redlines. Now here was the final application of the decals with a clear coat put over the top of them. That car turned out absolutely beautiful. I'm very happy and very proud of the way this car turned out. This looks good. Now after we got the car all back together and put the wheels on it, the car turned out absolutely beautiful. It's amazing how good your cars can look with just the application of some decals. A little bit of detail here on the tail lights, etc. Some wheels, some wheel swap here from Sam Ed Wheels. That looks absolutely beautiful. Now I just happened to make this car, it's a prototype, but I made some cars for some of my Patreon subscribers, and they're all going to get one of these. Now, here's what I was talking about earlier. If you just print on clear without the white toner underneath, the color of the car is going to show through. So the darker the car, it's going to muddy up the graphics. So definitely, if you've got a really nice decal job that you need to do on your car, you're going to have to get someone that does white toner decals to get them printed up for you, or they may already have them all made up. You just have to look and see what they offer on their website. But that's what happens if you just print on clear and then put it on a darker colored vehicle. Now, they do have decal paper that actually has a white base underneath it, and you can print on that also. Here's the same car, and we got a decal with the white backing paper underneath. Now I say paper, it's actually a very thin plastic. But that's what it'll look like. Now with something like this, you would have to trim it up with a razor blade super, super close, but you're still going to see a thick white outline around it, and it's not going to look very, very well. Okay? Now, the other thing is if you're using an inkjet printer, you're going to have to cover those decals with a coating of lacquer to protect it, because if you put it in the water, it'll bleed. Now, there is one last thing if you happen to be using microset. If you have an inkjet printer and you've coated it with a clear lacquer to protect your decals, the microset is not going to work that well because you sealed the decal with that lacquer paint, and it won't penetrate to help you soften up that decal to apply it to your vehicle. And there's today's tip from your Uncle Paulie. Now, if you happen to be designing decals and you want to get some measurements for these vehicles to send to someone to make decals for you, these are the measurements you're going to need. The two upper rows, the one where it shows the top down where you're looking at the roof, and the one on the side. You need to take some good pictures of this vehicle and show the side and the top nice and square, as you see in the top two photos. Now, the only measurement you're going to need is the one on the bottom right-hand corner. That's the only measurement you need to make sure that these decals that you want made are going to be to scale. Now, the bottom left-hand corner, if you send somebody a picture like that and say you want decals on it, that's not going to work, folks, because you can't get a good measurement and a good layout when the picture is all at an angle like that. So you need to make sure that the upper row there with the two pictures, nice square flat shots, that's what you're going to need to provide the person that may be designing your decals, or even yourself in this particular instance. So something to think about. And again, the only measurement you're going to need is the one in the bottom right-hand corner. This will help get you closer to getting the decals made that you need to have made to make your project turn out outstanding. Thank you for joining me today on Diecast Graveyard. We've got a lot more videos coming up in the future, so go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And thank you again for joining me here today. If there's something you'd like to see, put it in the comments. Thank you, and cheers.